I have been very excited for Dune Part 2 for multiple months now. More excited for this movie than I have been for any movie in a very long time, right? And with that level of hype, you think maybe it won't live up. You know, often when you have that level of hype, you walk in and maybe it doesn't live up to your expectations, right? I don't think a movie has ever lived up to my expectations as much as Dune Part 2. I was absolutely floored by this movie. As a fan of the books, as a fan of the first movie, as a fan of movies, as a fan of living and experiencing things through my eyes and my ears, this was something else. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I'm going to give a real quick spoiler-free review, but then we're going to really dive in because this movie absolutely demands to be discussed in more detail than a spoiler-free review can possibly give. So here's the spoiler-free lightning round. Should you see this movie? Yes, absolutely 100%. People are not being hyperbolic. This is a cinematic experience that is beyond special. Even if you didn't love the first one, I think you'll still walk out of this one feeling like you took something special away from it. Now that brings us to another point. Do you need to watch the first one before? Yes, and if you haven't seen it in a while, I would recommend rewatching it. Part 2 definitely stands on its own as a story, but it heavily relies on the world building and setup of the first movie. Dune is a very dense and politically detailed story, and if you don't fully understand what happened in the first movie, you might be a little confused in this one. So go rewatch the first one or watch it for the first time. Don't just throw it on and go do something else while you watch it. Really sit down and take a second to absorb it, because you will enjoy part 2 10 times more if you really understand part 1. All right, I think that's all for spoiler free. If you like action, spectacle, great performances, gorgeous cinematography, compelling story, you will be blown away by Dune Part 2. It is one of the best sci-fi movies I've ever seen. It is one of the best sequels I've ever seen. It's great. All right, now we're really going to get into it here. The spoiler review starts now. This is your warning, your one and only warning. If you think you can ignore spoiler warnings because you've read the book, there are still things that can be spoiled for you. There are differences. There are surprises. You don't want spoilers, trust me, even if you've read the book. All right, I'm going to break this review up into 2 sections. First, we're going to just go over the movie, but then I'm going to ask people who have not read Dune Messiah, the second book, to go ahead and leave. I'll tell you when we get to that part, because I want to talk about the future of the franchise and the third movie, which will be an adaptation of Dune Messiah. So I'll let you know when it's time to leave if you haven't read that one. The main thing about this movie that really stuck with me was Timothée Chalamet as Emperor Paul Muad'Dib Usul Kuzat Lisan al-Gaib Mahdi Atreides. I'm so happy that every single one of those crazy sci-fi names and titles are present in this movie, because I think it's so funny and stupid and in a really cool sci-fi way. Anyway, yeah, Timothée Chalamet kind of blew me away. He owned this role. The scene where he gets up in front of the endless sea of Fremen and just completely sways them had me absolutely gripped. He brought such power and such a commanding presence to the role that I honestly didn't know he had in him. I was like just a little bit skeptical, but he just totally captured me with this performance. The relationship between Paul and Zendaya's Chani is being rightfully praised, but my favorite part of this relationship is how it ends and how they're driven apart. Throughout the movie, they do an excellent job establishing that the Fremen are split between those who believe in the Lisan al-Gaib and those who do not. Chani is one of many who think the prophecy is just a bunch of superstition, but as the story progresses, everyone around her is converted to a fanatic follower, and by the end, she's pretty much the only Fremen willing to stand up to Paul. I gotta say, this adds a lot more depth to her character and the story as a whole compared to the book. In the book, Paul is just kind of like, hey, I gotta marry the princess and become emperor, but don't worry, we still chillin'. I don't even fuck with her for real. And she's just like, okay, honey. But in this movie, she's rightfully troubled by how cold and power hungry Paul has become. And it's especially tragic because Paul foresaw the possibility of losing her and actively resisted going south to fulfill the prophecy. I absolutely love how Paul's destiny and terrible purpose, as the book phrases it, were handled in this movie. And I'll talk about it a bit more later in the video when we get into the Dune Messiah part, but I just absolutely loved everything they did with that. Another aspect that really surprised me was Lady Jessica. I think she ultimately has less screen time in this one compared to the first movie, but the shift in her personality after she drinks the water of life is really something that caught me off guard. The moment she gains all the memories of all her Bene Gesserit ancestors. It's like all her motherly kindness and care is just sapped away, and she becomes a manipulative agent of the Bene Gesserit goals. Her presence can be felt throughout the entire film as she spreads the religious fanaticism around Arrakis. That, of course, brings us to a potentially controversial part of the movie, which is Paul's unborn sister, Aaliyah. I don't think they actually said her name in the movie, which kind of bugged me a little bit. Like, you could have just thrown it in there somewhere, but that's a very minor nitpick. But yeah, if you haven't read the book, Paul's sister's name is Aaliyah, and she's played very briefly by Anya Taylor-Joy in this one, but for the most part, she remains a fetus. I do think the Anya Taylor-Joy was pretty good casting, though, except they spoiled it at the red carpet premiere for whatever reason. And by the way, saying Anya Taylor-Joy is playing a mystery role in Dune Part 2 is very much a spoiler, because who else would she be playing? I think the way they handled Aaliyah in this movie was probably the biggest difference from the book. And like I said, it does have the potential to be controversial and upset some of the hardcore fans. Personally, I enjoyed the conscious fetus route they took. I think it still had the signature Dune weirdness while also being a little more digestible for the general audiences. If you haven't read the book or seen the David Lynch Dune, I'll fill you in real quick. In the original story, Aaliyah is actually born and is around 2 to 3 years old by the end of the story. Because of the water of life, she has the mind of a full-grown adult and actually ends up being the one who kills the Baron in the original story. It would have been cool to see them try to adapt that as a fan of the books, but I can see why they chose to go a different route. A 3-year-old who speaks so much like an adult that it actively freaks out the other characters would be difficult to put to screen in a digestible way for the general audiences. Even with the route they chose, I was still like looking around the theater in the parts where it was like showing Aaliyah in the womb. Like, is this just totally weird? Like, do people who haven't read the books think this is just totally insane? But it seems like people are receiving that pretty well. So I think they chose the correct path for that character. Another big standout for me was Stilgar. I knew Javier Bardem was perfect casting when I saw part 1, but I loved him so much in this one. He easily has the most jokes and humor in this movie, but that's absolutely not a criticism. Every single one of them landed extremely well in my theater. Honestly, just all the casting all around was amazing. I haven't even mentioned Austin Butler or Florence Pugh or any of the others who absolutely deserve all the praise they are getting. I think almost every major character had at least one moment where they really got to shine. I will say Christopher Walken as the Emperor was maybe a little underutilized. He just didn't have many lines or much screen time. However, every time he was on screen, he had a very powerful quiet surrounding him. He is very composed and calm in a commanding and captivating way. You almost feel the impact of his silence more than his words. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about the ending and how it sets up the next movie. So if you haven't read Dune Messiah and you want to go into the next movie totally blind when it comes out in 10 billion years, then you can go ahead and leave. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. Alright, now that it's just us serious fans, I got to get something out. I saw part 2 with my family, and only one of them has read the original book and none of them have read anything past that. They brought up Duncan, Idaho multiple times, both before and after the movie. I don't really know why, but my dad was just like, I bet Jason Momoa is mad he won't be in these anymore. And it took everything in me to just be like, yep, I bet. I really hope they keep making these past Messiah, because it's going to be so funny when we get to God Emperor and the general audience realizes Duncan Idaho is like the most important guy in the universe. Anyway, I just had to get that out. I thought it was funny. Let's talk about that ending though. It really was the perfect setup for Messiah. One of Paul's final lines is when a Fremen asks him what they should do about the great houses massing in orbit and not acknowledging his ascent to Emperor. And he says, lead them to paradise. And oh my God, I had such chills hearing that line and watching all the Fremen pile onto ships to go to war. Just knowing what those words, lead them to paradise, what that will bring, the billions that will die from that simple order. I like that it saves just a little bit of the impact for the next movie. Like, the people who know the story, we obviously know what's about to happen. If you're seeing the story for the first time though, you'll definitely acknowledge the fact that, like, it's the start of a war, and that's pretty much always a bad thing, but you don't fully grasp what's about to happen. And I think the audience will be in for a big shock when Dune Messiah opens with the whole billions are dead and dozens of planets have been completely exterminated in the name of Muad'Dib thing. I think it's going to be a real, like, holy shit moment for people who weren't previously aware of where the story goes. I'm very interested to see where Villeneuve takes Paul and Chani's relationship for the next movie as well, because obviously she ain't really rocking with him like that anymore, and that could make for some very interesting changes to the original Messiah story. I also just want to call it right now so I can say I told you so when the movie comes out. The stone burner scene and Paul using his prescience to see will be the greatest scene in any movie ever. I think Denis was born to direct that scene. I actually, like, I live to see that moment from this point on. I cannot leave this world without seeing the stone burner scene in Dune Messiah. I'm so hyped. I really do hope that even if Denis leaves the Dune franchise after the Messiah movie, I hope that the franchise is continued with another competent filmmaker, because I really would love to see a God Emperor movie. That's one of my favorites of the series. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Dune Part 2. I would love and fully plan to make a full, longer video when the movie comes out on digital and I have access to all the footage and that kind of thing, and I can rewatch it as many times as I want. I've been thinking of doing like a analysis of Paul's entire arc throughout both movies, something just bridging both of those movies for a video. I think that would be really fun, but that's still a couple months out, but I'm extremely excited to make more videos on these movies. All right, and with that, I'm gonna close this out. May your popcorn buckets be well lubricated. Oh my god, this video had way too much brain rot. Jesus Christ. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.